welcome to City Labs. We are more than happy to have you here. And this time is a really special event. This is our first tech meetup after the lockdown, and we are really glad to have a really good project presenting today. So we welcome Polkadot. They will be presenting the shared security in Polkadot, in the network. And for this, I will welcome Bill Laboon and Ali Stewart. So without further more, I will just pass the word to Bill, and then he will start explaining. Welcome, Bill.
All right, thank you. All right, hi everyone. As Fabiola said, my name is Bill Laboon. I'm the Technical Education Lead at Web3 Foundation. With me today is Alistair Stewart, who is our lead researcher at Web3. And just to give a sort of roadmap of what we're going to discuss today, I'm going to start with some of the problems that we see in terms of blockchain interaction and how they have been solved in the past. And then I will then hand off the mic to Alistair, who will then cover how we really solve those problems in Polkadot. So I'm going to apologize ahead of time for people that are very experienced with blockchain, because I am going to talk about some, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. At the beginning, things like double spend attacks, which I realize most of the people here probably have heard of, but I think it's really essential to then understand how Polkadot fixes these to make sure that we really understand them at a fundamental level. So before we talk about shared security, we have to ask, what is security? What do we mean by this when we say security? I think we all have a sort of general idea of what an insecure system versus a secure system, but in terms of blockchain and what we are trying to do in terms of blockchain security, what we want is to have some agreement on a canonical history. That everybody, or at least all the honest actors on the network, agree that in this block, whatever, Alice gave 1 Bitcoin to Bob, and in the next one, later, that Joe gives 9 Bitcoin to Pam, etc. And we know that in the process of block production, there may be some forks or disagreements on what exactly history is, but we should eventually converge to have for our purposes, secure blockchain on some canonical history that all honest nodes will agree upon. So the big problem, of course, when you are talking about how a blockchain is constructed, we always are sort of looking backwards as we produce these blocks, right? We have a hash of the previous block. We don't know what, at this block, what is going to be the next one until it is produced. So what we have is the possibility for forks or chain splits, where we have multiple blocks that all say, all right, I'm the next block. And according to our very simple model of a blockchain here, they both have a right to that block. Of course, this causes the problem of double spend attacks, where certain parts of the network will have different ideas of what this canonical history is, right? So here we have our 2 possible blocks, and we have Mallory, who is offering Bob 5 Bitcoin for 5,000 francs. Bob says, all right, that's sweet, that's a great deal. So Mallory makes a transaction. She sees that, Bob sees that Mallory has sent the transaction. He sees it on a block. However, on a separate block, Mallory produces a transaction that just sends the Bitcoin back to her, and it somehow forces this to be the canonical chain. And now on this canonical chain, Bob has 0 francs and 0 Bitcoin, the worst of both worlds, whereas Mallory has 5,000 francs and 5,000 Bitcoin. So this obviously, insecure, kind of the essential problem of early pre-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies is how to solve this. So proof of work, we have a way of fixing this because it's difficult to produce blocks, right? We need to mine. Luckily, there are lots of emojis to cover every emotion or possible thing one can do in blockchain here. So in this instance, Mallory still can do this attack. Like a double spend attack is still theoretically possible. The idea really is to make it economically, or not economically viable to do this, right? So let's say if producing blocks is expensive, then let's say we have to spend 500 Bitcoin to make a block. Well, doing this 5,000 franc scam is just not worth it. So the key idea here is that even though there is technical security, we still need to consider the economic security aspects of this, right? So any blockchain, there are some economic aspects we need to understand about attacking it in order to make sure that it is secure. So while Bitcoin really solves this, it makes it very difficult to do these small scams. We have, of course, the obvious externality that it uses lots of electricity, right? So more electricity than Switzerland. So now we're starting to get into the more ways that this was fixed. Can we protect systems without this negative externality of all this electricity? So instead of having your skin in the game be this extra work that you do, what if we have the skin in the game, what prevents you from producing blocks is to make it expensive using the tokens on the own system. So we now have proof of stake, right? Where we have some block producers and all of them have some bonded stake, some bonded tokens, that if you try to be bad, then instead of wasting electricity producing a valid block, it can be taken away from the other block producers. They're all constantly checking on each other. So again, apologies for your very, very fundamental aspects moving up into here. But I think that the key point we realize is both the bonding and slashing and using proof of stake or using proof of work, really any system that you use has some economic attack vectors. And when you have proof of stake, an interesting aspect of this is because the economic attack vector is really tied in with the value of the tokens on the chain, it provides some interesting aspects of how you approach that from a security perspective. It's harder to judge what the economic security of the system is because it's really sort of self-referential. And in such a system, right, if you have this sort of subjective economic value of, and often variable value, and attacking certain change in 2017 versus 2020, mounting an attack on them in terms of economics is going to be much less difficult. Right? If you want to, in a proof of stake system, because all of the economic value, the things that you are actually using to secure the system, can have variable values. If you spend enough to become the majority on the network, if the majority is dishonest, then you can commit this scam without dealing with any of the externalities here. So in this instance, we had only 25 francs worth of tokens, or 25 tokens on the network. If I can get 20 of these, then I am now the new arbiter of the chain. And I can, if I want to run my 5,000 franc scams, if I want to have economic transactions that are worth over 5,000 francs, I'm certainly not going to do it on a chain that only has 25 francs worth of economic backing. And when we see this, there are a lot of different blockchains out there, right? And this vulnerability is especially prevalent when you have these like small, perhaps experimental or new blockchains. So someone with a significant amount of economic power, some capital that it can use to attack chains, can more easily attack any of these chains. So if, again, just to make the math easier, I have just very small numbers. You can imagine just bigger numbers with the same, or perhaps less variance with the same basic idea here, is that for every one of these chains protected by 5 units worth of economic value, if I have 10 units of economic value, then I can become a majority stakeholder on that chain. And in a proof of stake system, that is going to mean that really, I have the power to do not anything that I want, but certainly to make sure that others see my version that I want people to see of the canonical history. So there are solutions that have been put out there like this. For instance, just like chain maximalism. If everybody just leaves, and these chains all die, all of the economic power is going to migrate to this top left chain. And now my adversary is going to have to gain, have a lot more than the economic power they have in order to gain a majority. Right? So here, again, in my very simple example, but with the same stake posted everywhere, the adversary that very easily could attack any of these chains, now when there is only one chain, they're not going to be able to attack this chain. They're not going to be able to determine the canonical history. But there's a drawback to this, right? Just like all software engineering, in blockchain work, everything is a trade-off. So if we do have single chain maximalism, where everybody and all economic value is on one chain, we now have a monoculture. So we don't give people the capability to try new things, to have perhaps chains that have different anonymity levels or different kinds of smart contracts or other built-in features. Different block production times, all sorts of these things that we want people to experiment with. People have different needs. We're not, we are all individuals, and different industries, different systems are going to have need of different kinds of blockchains. So what if we could take the best of both worlds here? So if we could have multiple chains, but somehow tie their economic value together so that they're protected by a single chain. So these chains can act, by themselves, but in terms of economic security, they're protected by a single chain. So we can do, again, the best of both worlds. We can combine that economic value to make it more difficult for people to attack the chain, but still allow these chains to do their own thing. So we may have a more privacy-preserving chain, or a chain with smart contracts, or a chain maybe a different kind of smart contract, or maybe then privacy and smart contracts, or other built-in features. So this is a good idea, but the problem is cross-chain communication is relatively difficult. If you are interacting on your own chain, it is very easy for you to trust the data on that chain. You understand how the chain works. You as a program on that chain, or like logic on that chain, I guess would be a better way of saying that. You can trust the data, you understand how it's interpreted, you know how it is sent from node to node. Other chains, you're going to have to come up with some way to make sure that these messages are in fact delivered, that they're not dropped. You're going to have some way of this other, you're going to just have to know how data goes from one chain to another, and what formats it's going to have to accept your data. You need some way of proving that a message went across and was interpreted the way that you want it to be interpreted, and not interpreted some other way. You don't know if you just send some binary data, how is that chain going to understand this? What is it going to do? You can obviously research this, you can write code, but you'll never know without doing some really difficult programming. So Polkadot takes these ideas that I laid out in a rather simplified manner here, where we do have a relay chain in the center here, which really focuses on organizing and confirming the state transitions of parachains. So we have individual chains that they can do their own work. They can have what we call their own state transition functions, which means they can have their blockchains operate in different ways. However, they're going to share their economic security and finalization by all attaching and communicating with validators, these block producers on the relay chain. So all these parachains, they're heterogeneous. They can have their own code, they can have their own features, their own functionality, they can be used for specific things, but they're going to share this security by interacting with the relay chain. So that's a very broad idea of the problems and the basic outline of Polkadot. And I'm now going to have Alistair take over, who will explain some of the details about how this is done.
Hi. Let me know if I start going a long way from the mic, because sometimes I do that. So if you can't hear me, let me know. So before I talk about how we get shared security in Polkadot, I should add there is something that we get from shared security other than just getting security for cheaper than you would if you did your own chain. And that's to do with interoperability. And in particular, it's going to make it easier for a developer to reason about building an application across several chains. So I kind of want a simple example of how you do something on several chains. And the obvious example is token transfer. We can do a lot more complicated things, and in fact this is more important for more complicated things than it is for token transfer. But token transfer is the thing everyone wants to do. So I'm going to have three chains, A, B, and C. And we're going to have some assets called £8 here that A is sort of in charge of. Now A wants to be able to, its asset to be used on other chains, on say B and C. And so a user on A maybe wants to send something, some tokens, £8 to a user on B, and maybe they want to send them to a user on C, and then we really would like to send them back to A again, and have this all work smoothly. So, and one of the difficulties here is that, well, we kind of make one chain follow the consensus of another chain, even if they're not part of a shared consensus system like they are in Polkadot. But A would like not to be able to trust anything more than its own system. And there are sort of schemes to deal with tokens from one chain and another chain without shared security. But they can get a little complicated. So the simplest idea is one called wrapped tokens. There's now a lot of wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, as I'm sure you all know. The basic idea is that B or some actor on B owns token that owns £8, and then there's some token on B which corresponds to £8, and the people that have this token own the tokens on A. And this works. It can often be made trustless, either with economics or with, if A can follow B's consensus, B can follow A's consensus, just with this consensus security of chains. But it's not obvious how to sort of extend it. So if we have A, B, and C here, what we're going to do with sending tokens from B to C. So we could wrap tokens twice. I think Cosmos has thought about doing this. So B would have wrapped £8, and then C would have wrapped B wrapped £8. And this means that if this person on C has this doubly wrapped token and wants to send it back to A, they've really got to, and have it still be £8, they've really got to go by B. Or we could have A account for the tokens on B and on C. But now to send tokens from B to C, I have to send a message to A to tell it that some of these tokens were only B's account on A, and now should now be owed on C's account on A. I mean, what we'd really like is to just be able to, for A to send a message to B saying, have some tokens, burn them on A, produce them on B, then B sends a message to C, the same thing happens, it comes back to A, and A should be able to know that B and C couldn't create its tokens. They couldn't mint new tokens without breaking their own security. And then without sort of, we want this all to be secured with the same level of security. And it's like with shared security, we can do this. And this makes this example a lot easier. For something more complicated than token transfer, it just makes the trust model easier. When you know that B is as secure as A is. Now, aside from shared security, which I'm going to explain later, the idea is that we're going to, what shared security is going to give us on our different parachains is that the code is executed correctly. And there's a few more complications before we can trust it. So the first obvious thing is that everyone has different code for their own sort of state transition, right? Every sort of blockchain defines its own, every parachain defines its own state transition, and we check that these are correct. But then the question is, how do we trust other people's code? Well, sort of the obvious thing to do is to make parts of the code shared. And so the simplest thing is we're going to have like palettes, like pieces of code that you can include in any chain. And so we're sure that the code that sort of acts on this transfer is going to be this. And if you trust people to include it, that's fine. But we have this idea called spree where we actually put the code in on the relay chain in this case, and everyone uses the same code. And so now if A, B, and C are using the same cross-chain token model, then if message passing works and shared security ensures that the code executes correctly, then we can have this module which basically, when it's instantiated for A pounds, only allows A to mint tokens but doesn't allow B or C to mint tokens. So A can just pass in the tokens, it comes back, and it's fine. Now, spree modules have to have like sandbox execution and state so that bugs or deliberate things in the rest of the system can't affect them. And we can also send messages, we can also address messages to them. And I suppose I'd better talk also about sort of how message passing works in Polkadot. I mean, the basic idea is simple enough. So the messages themselves come across just by, they go directly from people on one chain to people on the other chain, like either there's people in common, or they have sort of validators checking them that go to the other validators. And that gets the message across, but we need to sort of ensure that this message was sort of sent in our canonical history, right? So the way that works is that the relay chain sort of defines the history of Polkadot, of what parachain blocks happen and when. Now for us, message passing is going to happen faster than we finalize things, and that means we need to act on messages before they're in the canonical history. Like the relay chain can fork, and each fork sort of defines a consistent history, and we just need to make sure that that makes sense, and then whatever we decide at the end is going to make sense. So concretely, parachains should be acting on messages from parachain blocks that sort of happen on this fork of the relay chain, and in the order that they happen. So here's, so imagine these are this is relay chain blocks, that block 0, block 1, and block 2, and these blocks happen. We put a hash of them on the relay chain, and we do other things with them, and we sort of agree that on this relay chain block, these were the parachain blocks that happen, And then in the next block, I can like look on the relay chain to see if this guy sent me a message, and if he did, I can look for that message and include it and sort of prove that it was sent. And one difference in the way we do it to the way a lot of other people do it is that we sort of have an ordering across trains. So if A sends C a block in block 0, and then B sends it a message in block, in this round 1, okay, yeah, in this block 1 of the relay chain, then C had to act on this message first. Which is different than the way, say, Cosmos would do it, which you'd have lots of channels with all the different chains, and they would individually, you guarantee that these things were ordered, but not collectively. And that's handy because it kind of helps you ensure that the message is going to be acted on in a timely fashion, because they don't really have any choice than to act on this, or else they sort of end up eventually stalling the entire chain. Which is not ideal because we have to ensure that messages arrive. We have to build in enough redundancy to make sure this is always going to happen, even if some of our actors are bad. But it means that we have a fairly good idea that the messages, we're pretty certain the messages are going to arrive, and then we can sort of guarantee that they get acted on the other side in a timely fashion. And the messages they act on are sort of exactly the ones that are sent. Right, which is what we needed this example to work. So A just sends a message to B, it doesn't check whether this message ever gets there, and it just burns some tokens, sends a message, and then B just creates the tokens from nowhere. But because it's using the same code, if the code of A, B, and C executes correctly, then B is going to only have the tokens that were burnt on A, it can't mint its own tokens, it's going to be able to then send to C, it's going to send back to A, and A is going to know that no one could create its tokens. As long as it's expensive to ensure that the code of A, B, and C was run correctly. It's expensive to make the code run incorrectly. Now, not everyone in the system can check the code was executed correctly in each parachain, because that's just a lot of data. So sort of the real problem we're interested in, what is shared security? We want to make it expensive to attack a single parachain. Expensive as in it's a proof of stake system. It's going to cost a large fraction of the stake to attack a single parachain, even if there's a lot of parachains. So let's sort of go back to this picture of how Polkadot works. So the security is sort of provided by these guys here who are validators. We'll be thinking of 100 to 1,000, probably closer to 1,000 now, like high-performance computers that we're going to sort of, they need to have good processing power, good networking, and we're going to sort of elect these guys through some kind of proof-of-stake election scheme, nominated proof-of-stake that I won't talk about in this talk. And these guys are going to run the relay chain and ensure that it's secure. We're also going to divide them into groups to secure each of these parachains. And kind of a result of that is that, so in order to make the system scalable, we can't have all the validators check all the parachains, right? You've only got to be, by default, checking like a 1 or 2 or 3 parachains, not 100 of them that we might have. Otherwise, the system isn't going to be scalable. So now you have the question of if only 1 in 50 of people check one of these parachains, and this is sort of backed by 1 in 100 of the stake of the entire system. How do we make it expensive to attack this? So I think that sort of the key idea here is that it's sort of optimistic execution. When these guys claim this, we build on it straight away, but we don't believe that it's correct straight away. So the sort of equation here is that what's the expected cost of an attack? So it's the expected amount slashed, which itself depends on the probability that we get these guys and the amount we slash, divided by the success probability. So what we want is that we slash a large amount of stake, which by a large amount here I mean sort of 1 in 50th of the stake in the entire system, or 1 in 100. But we want to make sure that when someone attempts an attack, probably what happens is we slash them and the attack doesn't succeed. So we take away their stake and their attack doesn't succeed. And if we can have this, high probability, not astronomically high, but like 99% chance we can catch these guys, and only 1% chance that the attack actually works, then we can sort of amplify the cost of an attack. So, how do we do this? So, the idea here is that, so firstly, how much are we going to slash? So, this here is, so Polkadot, you can stake on it right now, as of 2 weeks ago, last week? 2 weeks ago. It's still sort of getting on, so this is an older network, this is our canary network, Kusama, that's probably going to have a bit less value than Polkadot. We've been running it since November or something. And these are sort of some of the stakers, some of the validators I picked up today, and the sort of stake backing them. So we have like 400 validators. We have the sort of 9 million Kusama, KSM, and two-thirds of those are involved in staking. And if you look at this sort of list, you see that like the least backed validators are still backed by, okay, that's still working here. It's not getting through. Yeah.
Is that
yours?
I don't think so.
Minor technical problems here. Yeah, so what that diagram showed is that like all validators were backed by about at least 1,000 of the stake, and there were 400 of them. So if we had like 100 parachains on Kusama, and like that would be 4 validators per parachain. If say 2 of those had to sign off on something, then 2 of those is like 1/500th of the stake of the system. And if we caught them with 99% probability, then the cost of an attack would be sort of, and the attack only succeeded with 1%, the cost of an attack would be about 1/5 of the Kusama in existence.
Do you just formally define a parachain?
Okay, so a parachain, a parachain, so basically it's, so there's a well-defined set of basically state machines. Each of these state machines tells like the central state machine, the relay chain, what its state transition validation function is. And each of these guys in a parachain, they go and run their own client, which will build a new block on the existing chain, which it will have to query the relay chain to work out what the right thing is to build a block on. And there'll be some guys in this chain, collators, that will produce this block, and then they sort of send it to the validators who check that the state transition validation function was executed, that it passes, that it validates. And that it did the state transition it promised it would. Something valid, like it checks that all the signatures on all the transactions worked. So we sort of have these many state machines, and they're all sort of coordinated by this one state machine, the relay chain, which is a blockchain using probably fairly familiar consensus ideas. Now, we don't necessarily trust any of these parachains or the actors on them, and we want to sort of secure this by the stake of the relay chain. Does that make sense? And so here, like the validators that are assigned to this particular parachain check something, and we want to ensure that it's going to cost a lot of money in terms of dots, in terms of what we slash on the relay chain, for these guys to get something incorrect on the parachain. Hello? Hello? Okay. So the argument was that if we could detect with sort of 99% probability if these validators who were, the small fraction of validators who were assigned to this particular block lied about it being valid, then it costs a large, it costs an amount which doesn't scale with the number of parachains to get a single parachain have an incorrect figure. And this is sort of the magic. So if we have more parachains, we would need more validators, but it wouldn't drop the security as long as we had all those and we could make the system work. It wouldn't drop the security on an individual parachain. And sort of the mechanism in a lot more detail works like this. So first, the parachain validators. So someone produces on the parachain produces a new block. The parachain validators, the randomly selected fraction of the validators associated with this parachain, are on this network. They get the block, they validate it, they sign off on it, they say it's valid, and then its header on these signatures goes onto the main chain. And then this really complicated thing I've glossed over, we check it's available. That is that everyone could get hold of this block. We actually do this by using Erasure Coding, where we can sort of robustly, without every validator having too much data, ensure that if on sort of a 2/3 honesty assumption on the whole set of validators, that we can actually reconstruct any individual block. When we know it's available, now they're sort of committed, right? They put this money behind, and anyone who wants it can go and get this block, and if they discover it's invalid, then these guys are in trouble. So we have sort of random extra validators check, and this randomness has to be not known to the first people, so that they can time their attack. And also any sort of parachain nodes called fishermen can also check this block, although we don't necessarily want to assume they even exist, but they will help if they do exist. And then sort of, if we have kind of validity, we sort of escalate it. We get basically we increase the number of checkers. And if something really happens, if something happens like the validators say something's valid, or some of them say it's valid and some of them say it's invalid, we escalate this all the way and everyone checks. And that breaks the scalability. But if there's sort of a clear result and there's only a few people saying it's invalid when actually everyone else says it's valid, or there's small people saying it's invalid when actually it's valid, then we can slash everyone on the wrong side. And this doesn't break our scalability that much because it's really expensive to make everyone check. And basically, if there are no reports or we decide it's valid, then and only then can we finalize this block? Can we make sure it's canonical? We have to sort of delay this a bit. So it might be a while after we produce the block when we decide we're never going to go back on this. But we would like to do that eventually. And if we decide it's invalid, then we can slash everyone who said it was valid, including this reasonable amount of stake owned by the majority of parachain validators, and then we roll back because we haven't finalized this, and then we go and build on the the relay chain before we included this block. And the result of this is that we still go fast, because as soon as we get to stage 2, when we decide something's available, we can then go and build on it, on this relay chain block that contains this thing. We can then make it happen, we can build on this, we can build more parachain blocks on it, But we sort of, these guys have committed, and so we're still going to punish them if we find they've done the wrong thing. And as long as it succeeds with sort of 99% probability or something, smaller than the one in the number of, about one in the number of parachains, then we'll have got something where the security doesn't really depend on the number of parachains, as in the sort of the expected cost of an attack. And that's sort of the magic behind Polkadot shared security. Okay. Thanks for listening. Have you got any questions for me or Bill?
Thank you.
The slash funds are, sorry. The slash funds are, they're erased from the system forever? They're burned, no?
You can't say. You know the answer, right?
Was it? Yeah. I'm sorry. You said they're erased forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, sorry. Shoot. I'm trying. Are they? Because we've changed this. So they.
No, we haven't changed it.
Oh, really?
No, I don't think so. So yeah, slash funds, no, they go to the Treasury, where the on-chain governance can decide what to do with them. It was kind of crucial to this system, especially on Kusama, which we break every third day, that the governance had a way of unslashing people. So if someone slashed because of a bug, they can get the money back. Also, it sort of doesn't mess with our inflation. So they go to the Treasury and the governance can decide who should get the money.
Cool.
If one of the verifiers makes a wrong claim but the block is invalid, is he punished ever?
If someone says, which way around? So if someone says the block is
Invalid.
and actually it's valid, yes, then that's also punishable.
I noticed in the recent paper there's like a future work section. It said nested relay chains. So how does the security model evolve or mutate when you start nesting these?
So that's definitely interesting. So it's code-wise it's quite easy because we coded the relay chain on substrate, the same sort of thing that makes it easy to code parachains in, and it has the same sort of definition of its runtime function. You can easily make a parachain into a relay chain code-wise. The security model, yeah, that's a bit more complicated. And we haven't decided exactly what the security is going to be. That's why it's still future work. So one of the things we've avoided in our security model is, so what Ethereum and many other systems do is they have a very large amount of validators on every shard. And they can still assume that every shard is 2/3 honest. So if you choose validators at random, then sort of the bigger the set, the more probability that we're going to produce guys who are majority honest. Simply because if only a few validators are dishonest, then they're unlikely to end up on the same shard. Now with Polkadot, we wanted to push it, we want to push our scalability right up so that we had only a few guys on each shard, on each parachain. And this meant that we couldn't rely on this. Probably for the nested relay chains, the maths will be different because there'll be lots of validators on every chain, on every first, level, chain. Then we can reason a bit more that these guys are probably honest. But just how far we push things up, there's still some questions to be answered.
That was all the questions. Do we have more questions? No? Okay.
What are actually the incentives for the validators to do the check? Are they rewarded somehow?
Yeah, they get paid. So everything that we include on the chain, we pay the validators. So the randomly selected validators, they select themselves by running a verifiable random function that everyone can check afterwards. So we don't know who they are beforehand, but afterwards we can check that they were one of the people that should have been checking this. And that means we can, we know who should have been checking it afterwards, and then we can pay them for checking it. It's, that's a complication, but the basic idea is that everyone who should be doing a check, who does a check, gets paid.
Well, I think those are all the questions. For today, on the name of CV Labs, I really want to thank you guys to be to Alistair and to be for coming today, and for everybody for joining today, making the effort to come here in person to CV Labs, and as well for the audience that is following the live stream. So thank you. I hope to see you pretty soon with all the events here on live at CV